So with that, we might as well just jump right into it. Abdul Rastagar is our host today, presenting a presentation that I actually saw in London for the first time. He is the Director of Product Marketing for Viva Systems, and he did this presentation at the Product Marketing Summit. I think that was in December. Is that right, Abdul?
Yeah, that was back in December when we could still travel.
When we could still travel, no kidding. Such a different time. And I'm really not saying this, but it was one of my favorite presentations from the entire conference. So after I saw that, we connected with him, and I thought that our audience who is heavily product marketing and competitive intelligence professionals would love this presentation on value propositions. So with no further ado, Abdul, I'll stop sharing and kick it over to you, and we can get started.
All right, sounds great. Let me share my screen here. And the moment you started talking, my dog started barking. So hopefully you won't hear them in the background. How's that? Can you see my screen okay?
Yeah, this is perfect.
All right. So thank you, Katie and the Clue team for having me. Thank you, everybody, for being on here. I hear it's quite a large crowd, so I'm very excited about that. I'm here to talk about value propositions, but before we start, I want to make a quick note because I know it's a pretty difficult time economically speaking, and a lot of people have lost their jobs, really talented people, through no fault of their own. So I think we should all be helping each other, and I think one way I can possibly help people is if there's anybody out there who wants to have some feedback on their resume or practice mock interviews from kind of a marketing perspective, not that generic recruiter perspective. You find me on LinkedIn, message me, and we'll figure out a time to do that. Happy to help. I think that's probably the least I can do for people out there. So with that, value propositions is something that I feel very passionate about. It's something I struggled with early in my career. And when I got into marketing, especially in software, I looked at value propositions. I thought they sucked. I didn't really like them at all. And the reality of it is that I wasn't really sure what I was doing, whether I was doing it correctly or not. And I was looking around, everybody else was talking about features and functionality, very low level value propositions. It was kind of tech talk. There was no differentiation. And I thought to myself, there has to be a better way. And over time, I developed this kind of methodology, this structured framework with some assistance. This isn't purely mine. I have to give credit to some people, others as well. But this is how it evolved. And I use it today to launch all new products. And I use it routinely. It's something I want to share with you guys. The challenge with value propositions today is that the way a lot of people do them is they do them from their own kind of business perspective and with their sales goals in mind. And instead of looking at it from the customer's perspective with the buying needs and the ultimate buying motivation in mind. So the methodology I'm going to talk to you guys through today is going to help reframe you from your own kind of personal or business perspective to the customer's perspective, right? And one thing I also want to mention is that this framework actually can also be applied to yourself in your career. So if you have a job opportunity and you're talking to a hiring manager, you can use this framework to position yourself and differentiate yourself from other candidates. So at the end, we're going to circle back around that as well. All right. So I'm going to start with some examples. The first one here, this is the Microsoft Zune. Some of you may remember it. It's an MP3 player that Microsoft came out with in 2005. It was their answer to the Apple iPod. And I remember distinctly when it came out, it looked sleek. All the technology editors, they loved it. The reviews were fantastic. Everyone was saying, this is as good as the iPod, perhaps even better. Excuse me. But the reality of it is I never actually met anybody who owned the Zune. And that's because it never got even 1% market share. Microsoft retired this product quietly in about 2011. And this was something that they had so much hope for. So we're going to talk a little bit about that from a marketing perspective of what went wrong here. But before we do that, let me tell you a little bit about myself, give you some background. I leverage unique leadership of strategy while optimizing action-oriented and dynamic alignment of business synergies and so on and so forth, right? This is a joke. Please don't take this seriously. I put this up for a reason, because in the business world, in the B2B world, we tend to hide when we don't have a way of proving value to our customers, we tend to hide behind words that sound fancy, but at the end of the day, they're empty and vague and they mean nothing, right? This is just a collection of buzzwords. And what it tells me from a customer's perspective is that this person really doesn't have a way of proving their value to me. So we want to stay away from that type of language, right? We want to get into a type of language that really adds and proves the value. And the way we do that, the way we speak to customers and the way we position ourselves, it has a tangible impact on how we're perceived. And it also has an impact how the competition is perceived. So you can actually use the wording and the language to separate yourself and differentiate yourself, okay? And this isn't just true for your solutions and products that you're selling, but also for you yourself. We see that, on this previous slide, that type of wording, we see a lot of that on LinkedIn as well. And perhaps, of course, not to this extreme extent, but you see elements of that, right? And I think we can do better in product marketing. I think that's where our kind of strategic value comes in, to be able to elevate the message. So I said my value propositions tend to suck, and here's some examples. These are real life examples from Fortune 100 companies up on their websites talking about why you should be buying their products. And if you spend a moment just to read through these, right, and what you see is very low level tactical feature function type messaging. It's all about the specific capabilities of that product. It's tech talk. We have no idea if it's differentiated. We don't even know if the customer even cares about these things. Chances are they don't. Because even if you're an IT person, and a lot of these are IT messages, but even that IT director has business problems to solve. Their fundamental purpose for their job is to solve business problems, not IT problems, right? So no IT director in the world is going to get up and say, I'm going to buy myself a star schema today, right? They're going to have much more fundamental issues. So for example, if you're the head of IT at a large restaurant chain, your business model has just been turned upside down. You used to have all of these customers coming into your store, sitting down, eating their dinner. And now in just a matter of just a few weeks, really, that model's gone out the window. The way you're surviving is through curbside delivery, pickup and takeout and so forth. And you really don't know when you can go back. You don't have much confidence about when you can go back to the old model or how the future will look. So what you really need is a solution to help you with business continuity, right? That's their fundamental problem at this point there. And it's not about star schemas or whether that database is scalable or not. That's not what they're looking for. And that perspective is true regardless of whether it's an IT director or human resources manager or supply chain manager. They all have fundamental business problems to solve. And if that's the case, then we got to ask ourselves, why are we talking to customers like this? Why are we throwing our kind of platform capabilities at them, right? We've got to really kind of narrow our message. And the reality of it is that a lot of this messaging originates from product management. And there are people who tend to be technologists, come from a technology background. They don't have the sales training perhaps, and they'll sit down with an end user and ask the end user what's important for you. And that person will say, well, I spend a lot of time coding. I wish I had some sort of wizard or whatever it is to make it easier for me. And then the product manager will put it in the business requirements, and engineering will develop it. Marketing comes along and says, hey, we're going to launch this product. What do we say about it? And the product manager will say, look, all my data tells me that the wizard is really important, so we're going to make sure we emphasize that. And then marketing will slap that on the website. And that's how you end up with this type of language, which is, at the end of the day, completely wrong, right? And I know that's for a fact that that's true, because at least one of these messages here comes from a company where I used to work at. And that was the way our process worked for hundreds and hundreds of our products. So this is a pretty broad problem. And if marketing is really good, they're going to take that language and think about it and say, hey, what does a wizard really mean? It means ease of use. So they'll change, instead of saying a wizard on the website, they'll put ease of use on there. But even that misses the point, because that end user that the product manager was talking about wasn't looking for ease of use, right? They were looking, why were they coding in the first place? That's the fundamental business problem they're trying to solve. It's not about how they're solving it, right? And by the way, just on a quick note, ease of use, we're in 2020. If your product's not easy to use, you've got other problems. So ease of use should never be a value proposition, okay? Or extremely rarely, I should say. All right. So that kind of brings me back to the Zune. This is an actual advertisement from 2000, whatever it was, back in those days. Millions of tracks for the price of one CD a month. And this was very much Zune's strategy, go directly at the iPod, claim that we're as good as they are, but cheaper. There was another ad, which I can't find an example of, unfortunately, anymore, but it was a picture of an iPod, and it said in really big letters, it said $29,700. And the copy below it said, if you purchase this iPod and fill it with music, it's going to cost you this much to fill 120 gigabytes worth of music. Or you can get that same with a Zune for $15 a month. Right? So this was very much part of their strategy. And to see why that didn't work, why that didn't resonate, you have to kind of take yourself back in those early 2000s when Microsoft was the big dominant consumer electronics player. But at the same time, the brand was tarnished. People were tired of it. It wasn't seen as innovative. it would get those constant blue screens of death. There was all kinds of anti-monopoly investigations. So people were just kind of sick of Microsoft a little bit at the time. And in this environment, Apple comes along, and Apple offers technology that's perceived to be better. And it's also much more innovative designs, right? So you go to your friend's house and they have one of those big bubbly purple or orange or green Mac desktops, right? They look super cool. Or you go to Starbucks and everybody's in their sleek MacBooks, or walking down the street with the iPods. They were paying 3-4 times the price, these people, for Apple products because it was a lifestyle purchase. They were not buying technology. They were buying an image about themselves, a persona, saying that, look, I'm going to reject all the other stuff. I'm hip and trendy. I'm cutting edge. I'm not accepting and progressive of the new stuff. So in this environment for Microsoft or for the Zune to come in and say, I'm going to do it for cheaper, it just wasn't the right message, because price was not a pain point for those customers. Okay. And of course, hindsight's 2020. This is not meant to criticize Microsoft. It's a fantastic company that I really, really respect. But I think we can learn from each other, right? And this is a great opportunity to learn. And the fundamental point here is that you need to sell the problem that you're solving, not the product you make. Because if a customer can solve their problem without your product, they'll do it, right? If they can do it manually or by making a phone call or even on a spreadsheet, done, you're out of the picture. You need to be able to translate how your product or solution solves the problem, right? It's not about your product. That's a fundamental point that we need to make. So I've gone a little bit through the setup here. Let's get to that actual framework and about how to reframe from the customer's perspective, from our personal business perspectives to the customer perspective. And there's 4 steps to doing that, 4 specific steps that need to be done fairly sequentially. One is to understand the environmental context, all of the kind of influences and factors that are out there that are influencing the company or the industry, right? So I'll give you some examples. I mean, today, I guess it's all about COVID and the economic challenges we're having. So, people are working from home. You're having this huge increase in number of people who are shopping online. It went from 10% to 27% in just 8 weeks. It wasn't expected to happen for another 10 years at least for that large of a share of online retail purchases. So you have these disruptive trends that happen. But there are other factors. If we put those 2 dramatic ones aside, there's the aging of the population has a tremendous impact. Sorry, my dogs are barking again. The aging of the population is a tremendous impact. So today, 12,000 Americans reach retirement age. You think about that, that's a tremendous number. But that's been happening every single day for the last 5 years. And if that's not impressive enough, it's going to continue to happen every single day for the next 15 years. Every day, 12,000 Americans will reach retirement age. So think about the implications that has for the business, for your employees, for customers. Tremendous shifts, right? The California Consumer Privacy Act went into effect on January 1st. What is that's done for the United States in terms of privacy, what GDPR did in Europe. Interest rates are really low, right? To the point that businesses can purchase for free. That's going to have all kinds of implications. Borrow loans for free. That's going to have implications on how they purchase in the future. So those environmental contexts, and that you really have to kind of think about that. What does that mean? And once you understand that, then you start to think about, well, what is the customer-specific pain points? I mentioned earlier the IT director at a restaurant chain, right? Business continuity is their pain point, not about star schemas. An HR manager 2 months ago, they couldn't find for their life, they couldn't find the right candidate because it was an employees market. There were more jobs available than people seeking jobs. And just like that model has switched. They're flooded now with resumes. They have so many they can't possibly process them. So they're looking for an applicant tracking system, but they're not really looking for the technology. They're looking to solve a problem, which is to hire the right candidate faster. Right? So you need to understand what is it that your customer is actually trying to solve. And when you get to that, then only then can you really start to think about where do you fit into this picture? What are the business benefits that you provide, right? That map back to those fundamental problems. It's not about features and functionality. Those things are important, but they have their place in an RFP document, in a demo, and so forth, right? In a competitive evaluation. But it's not in your messaging, because if your messaging is about integration and configurability and ease of use, basically what you've done is given them a feature checklist. They got to check, and then move on and forget about you. Okay. So you really have to connect much more fundamentally. And finally, you can do all those first 3 perfectly right, and you still won't be successful if you don't differentiate. Because if every vendor looks the same, and speaks the same and sounds the same, what are you going to make your purchase decision on, right? It's price. That's very natural. So you're going to go for the cheapest vendor. It's going to be a race to the bottom. And as a technology provider, that's very rarely a winning situation to be in. Okay, so those are the 4 steps to reframing. All right, so let's take a look at some value propositions that are done right. Here are those examples of an example of what I really like. Increasing customer satisfaction, maximizing revenue, and reducing risk and deployment time. This is the claim that this company makes about their product. What I like about it is it's business centric. Presumably, those are the specific pain points the customer has as well, right? And you know, I don't know if it's differentiated because I don't have the context of the competitors, but let's give them the benefit of the doubt. But they make the claim, but they also give out proof points underneath it, right? So there's consistent data and simplified processes. We're going to maximize revenue through more productive sales orgs. We're going to reduce your risk through standards-based integrations. So it's not just an empty claim. There's some sort of backup behind it. And notice that they actually talk about integrations. All those things I said not to do, it's okay because this is the enabler here, the proof point. It's not the benefit, right? The benefit is that reduced risk and deployment time. So I like this. One other thing about this, value propositions should always come in 3s, never more, never less. Never more because you're going to dilute the message. People are going to forget. They won't remember what you said. If you do less than 3, you're gonna have a tough time differentiating, because chances are one of your competitors is going to have at least 1, possibly even 2 of the same value propositions. So you want to have 3 so you can differentiate it, so you can progressively build up that barrier of differentiation. The only other thing I would do to this, I would quantify this. Okay. So if I'm going to make a claim that I'm going to increase customer satisfaction, I'm going to back it up with evidence, actual real world evidence of how much I've done it for similar companies, similar profile. What percentage have I increased customer satisfaction, or how much have I increased revenue that I can tie directly to the purchase of through the use of my product, right? And maybe in reducing risk and deployment time, maybe the industry standard is 5 months for this type of deployment, and with this standards-based integration, you can do it in 3 weeks, right? And that's that contracted time to value. So this type of value modeling is extremely complex, time-consuming, and difficult, and that's why people oftentimes don't do it. And that's exactly why you should be doing it, because chances are your competitors are not. So if you go in there with the claim, a backup, and evidence, real-world evidence, you've already really created that big barrier of separation between yourself and the competition. Okay. So if there's only one slide in this entire presentation that you should pay attention to, if you forget everything else, I mean, this is it, right? If you're multitasking, take a moment and let this slide absorb, because it's not about the products, right? It's about the solved problems. That's what customers are purchasing. They're buying solved problems. I made the point earlier that if they can solve their problem without your solution or your technology, done, you're out of the picture, right? So you need to connect back to that. So I'm going to shift gears a little bit and go through a case study, something that I went through a few years ago that I think will be very insightful for you guys. And maybe you won't map one-to-one to what you're doing, but I think the idea is there, and you'll probably be able to pick up some ideas, and it'll spark some ideas for yourselves as well. Remember in my framework, I said that we need to start with understanding the context. In this case, the industry was going through a productivity crisis. They were spending, you see in that blue line, exponential levels of money each and every year. It was going up in this sharp kind of hockey stick mode. And for that investment, they were getting roughly the same return. They were not increasing the number of products, that's the red line, not really increasing the number of products that they were selling each year. So the ROI is dropping quite dramatically. The products that did have on the market were going, patents were expiring. So they were having all these kind of Me Too competitors come in and take away market share. And finally, it was a regulated industry, so they constantly have to meet different government regulations, and that was also adding to the complexity and the cost. So this is the context our customers were in, right? And we were selling into the space. We were the oldest and largest vendor, the oldest vendor and the largest by market share by far. But the problem was that we were not the only vendors. There were others out there, and the way we had set ourselves apart was that we were the most expensive. And in the old days, it didn't matter because we had a lot of really good relationships and the customers were making money hand over fist, so price wasn't that big of a deal. But in this new environment, you have all of these other vendors who are providing essentially the same product. And the CFO is telling our customers, you've got to cut costs. They're coming to us either canceling contracts or asking to renegotiate, right? And we realized that if we want to sustain ourselves, we have to evolve alongside our market as well, our customers as well. Otherwise, we won't be around next year. So the CEO, to his credit, he revamped the sales organization, replatformed the technology, and then we also changed our go-to-market approach. So we created what I call the value proposition workshop. This was a 2-day offsite meeting, brought together all these various customer-facing teams for the first time actually in this organization, that we brought them all together to talk specifically about the customer. Well, you know, going through that framework, what are the customer's pain points? What are the external contextual drivers and influencers? What is the customer trying to solve? How do we map to that? What is our competition telling them, right? And from there, we developed our messaging, and we didn't just go out there and scale it out and send it to every single customer in the world. We actually tested it first. We got some external validation through partners and through a handful of very trusted customers. And then we tested it on a handful of competitive opportunities, just to make sure that we had it right. And then we refined the message and went out finally later. But the fact that we brought all of these different teams together in one place, turned out to be really, really critical. We didn't realize it at the time how important that would be. Okay, so I'll talk about that in a second, about how that worked out. But what we did in this case, we mapped out who are our customers and what does that buying committee really look like. And we found that the purchasing decisions often made here in the middle, right? The line of business is making the purchasing decision. They're the ones that are trying to solve the problem. But you have other important influencers such as IT and procurement. So IT was, unlike the business actually liked us. I mentioned earlier, we had a lot of relationships with them. IT didn't know us. They didn't really care about us. They were neutral. And, as long as we passed their audit, they were fine with it, but they were just as well fine with any other vendor who passed the audit. Procurement was a challenge for us because we were the most expensive, and procurement cares at the end of the day about one thing, right? It's price. In this case, it was price and compliance because it's a regulated industry. So our strategy was to turn IT into a soft supporter and then find ways of neutralizing procurement's objections, excuse me. And the way we did that is we started to list out all of the kind of decision criteria that these different roles do have in their assessment of vendors. And we came up with these 8 that really comes down to what it is that we're looking for when they're looking for when they're evaluating us. And we mapped it against each single role, and you see quite clearly that there's different priorities. They're not fully aligned. The business cares about productivity. That's really what, the whole point of purchasing that solution. But you see, procurement doesn't care at all, and that's so ironic, I find, because the entire purchasing decision rests on the fact that we need to make you more productive. Next, we took those 8 dimensions and mapped it against the competition to see, hey, where do we stand against the competitors? So -1, we stack ranked. -1 if we were behind the competition, 1 if we were ahead, and 0 if there was competitive parity. And I make it look so simple and clean here, and you'll see at the bottom that we come out ahead, but not that much, not enough to justify the price difference. And while this looks so simple, this was, we're 2 days worth of discussion and conversation. And in that conversation, we came across a couple of insights that we hadn't really expected or thought of. For example, the sales director mentioned that I've talked to customers who've told me they don't care about the technology they're buying because we're the largest user group. They have this community and they want to buy into that community. And then a product manager piped up and said, well, that's funny. I heard the same thing. The CFO of one customer wanted to cancel the contract, and everybody in the company objected because they didn't want to leave that community. So we started to think to ourselves, hey, wait, is the community important? Did we miss something here before? And if you think about why a community is important, why a customer would care, it's from a user community. And this was, by the way, this was very complex software. So from a user community, these companies learn from each other how to use the technology. Maybe there's functionalities that the other companies are using that they themselves are not. They can bring that knowledge in-house. Or maybe there's different business processes, even more important, that other companies are doing, right? That they can bring in those ideas in-house. Or if you're looking to hire somebody, where do you hire them from, right? You've got this community of expert users. They know the industry. They know the business process. They can come in and make a difference on day one. So they're perfect candidates for you. And by the way, it's also a perfect opportunity for you to go find a job elsewhere, right? A little more subtle, but that hint is there as well. So we decided, well, let's add the idea of a community to this, right? And now you see how we start to differentiate a little bit more. Nobody else had a community that was as large as ours, not even close. So when we decided to put that in, this is where we went out and tested it with some kind of customers and some partners to see if that was really made sense for them, if that was true, if our hunch was true. And this is finally what we came out with, the value proposition that we came out with. Remember I said they always come in threes. Here are the 3 value propositions that we came out with. 1, we make you more productive. And the idea of productivity is so fundamentally important to these customers that we have to have it in our message. If we don't have any reason to be speaking to them in the first place. We don't have that right. So productivity is critical, but we're not the only ones that make them productive. I already said that right there, but other vendors. But we actually spend a lot of time quantifying them, the productivity increase. And I will spend a lot of time on site with customers, mapping their business processes, having them validate these models I built, and then plugging in their own numbers. And we came up with these, on average, 27% more productive than what they were doing before. And no other vendor had done that. And that's how we were able to kind of really differentiate ourselves with real world evidence, and evidence validated by the customer themselves, actually. Compliance, I mentioned earlier, right, is pretty important to this industry. And now normally I would say compliance is not, it's just like ease of use. Should never be a benefit because it should be assumed. But we were in this unique situation where our competitors had dropped the ball on compliance and we had a perfect track record. So it was a natural differentiator. And we know how important compliance is. So we added that in there. And finally, I already touched on the idea of how important the community was. Now, we have in here some messages that appeal to IT, specifically the network, right? So we can go back to the IT people and say, look, if you purchase from us, you get access to these hundreds and hundreds of other companies, peers at these companies, that you can learn from and connect with. And by the way, that might actually be a future career opportunity for you. So we softly biased IT in that sense. And we also gave the business messages to take back to procurement objectives. So if procurement said, hey, it's too expensive, the business is going to counter with, well, look how much more productive they're going to make us. And that we're going to gain those, that productivity difference is going to help us gain the cost in just a matter of a few months or a year, whatever it might be. And by the way, we have less risk with these guys. Other vendors, if there's a compliance violation, it's going to cost us millions of dollars, right? So now we've armed the business to also counter the procurement objections. And this worked really well for us. So the output of this value proposition workshop was this one slider. It wasn't anything complex. It was just a 3x3 matrix is what we called it. And it had the top line, customer-centric business benefits, its productivity, compliance, and network, right, this community. And we backed it up with proof points, quantified proof points. And that forms the basis of our messaging. And the most important part, or maybe not the most important, but the critical important part is to make sure that you use that messaging universally, right? That every channel that you use hits home on the same things, whether it's your sales pitch or your website or any thought leadership. Always drive back to the same message. So as we kind of wrap up here, I want you to think about this framework and this a concept that I just walked through, how it applies to you as a career professional. And when you're hiring, there's essentially more or less a hiring community in many cases. And that hiring community, all those people, they may not be aligned on what they're looking for. They have different motivations. So the boss is looking for somebody who can take the load off their shoulders, get the job done so that they can focus on their own work. And the CEO is looking to see whether they can groom you for perhaps a future leadership position. Human resources is interesting because they actually have a sense of anxiety that if they promote you as a qualified candidate to the boss and you turn out to be not that good, their credibility is at risk, right? So they always have that little bit of fear in the background. Your direct reports, if you're a people manager, they're looking to see if you're able and willing to nourish their careers and help them develop. Your peers, they want to work with somebody who's nice and competent. So those are some of the things that are running around in the background, right? And you need to understand that. And then what are the kind of 3 reasons a company should hire you? What's your personal 3x3 matrix, right? What are those differentiated value propositions that you have that none of the other candidates have? And how do you back that up with accomplishments? And I would say quantified accomplishments, right? What have you done in your past history? And let them see how that applies to their position and to your role and what you can do for the organization in the future. Okay. So with that, I want to reiterate my offer from the beginning. If you joined in late, if you're looking for somebody who gives you feedback on your resume from a marketing perspective, or if you want to conduct a practice interview, marketing interview, happy to do that with you. Just find me on LinkedIn. again, Katie and the Clue team, thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to speak today.
No problem. Thank you so much for your presentation. That was great. And we have a couple of questions so far that have come in. So I'll ask those for you to answer, Abdul, if you don't mind. And then there might be a couple of additional ones that people want to share as well. So from Jeremy, this was a really interesting question. What's the best way to present this type of value prop in a website? Do you recommend making the strategic business benefit, i.e. increased satisfaction, as headlines, and then the sub details, from your example, it was like through consistent data or whatever that secondary point below? He said, I worry about the overuse of strategic business benefits in external messaging because they feel vague and can leave customers wondering exactly what you do.
Yeah, I would absolutely use that. If you look at some of the leaders in this space, I would say Workday, Salesforce, a number of other companies, you look at their websites, go up on there, look through some of their products, they all do this. They do it really well. There is a sense of what you said, Jeremy, that's true. It can be perceived as vague if if you don't have the detailed evidence to back it up, which is why you need to include that in your webpage, right? You need to have those bullet points or the sub points of what specific, be more specific about what you can do for them. Because you don't want to just be able to just make the claim and leave it at that. You want to have hard evidence to back it up.
So you're saying to put the quantifiable data points as well on the website?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great. Okay, second question from Donna. And Donna actually, Abdul, she found your Zune ads or the iPod one. So she sent a couple of links that I'll share with you. Yeah, she found a couple of links for us. Yeah, as well as like a YouTube video. Okay, her question was, how important is it to have all the constituents present for the VP workshop? What's the right next step if perhaps the alliances team can attend? Should you get their input in advance of the workshop, circle back after, especially if you want VPs adopted?
Yeah, so that's a fantastic question. The answer is it depends on your organization, right? For us in that time, those were the right people that we needed. It may be very different for you. So if you can't get the key people, and you'll have to define who the key people are, if you can't get them on there, you're wasting your time. You need to have them involved in this, okay? It's that simple. I really strongly believe that everybody needs to be there. They need to be dedicated for it. We had actually a rule. There was no multitasking, no devices, no phone calls, no emails, nothing. You were 100% dedicated. We built times into the calendar to give people time to go answer their emails or whatever. Because it's a big deal taking a sales director out of the field for a couple of days, right? Or any of those people. But I feel very strongly you have to have all of the critical people there.
An additional question that's building on some of your points before about shifting away from talking about features. If you are stuck in sort of features and benefits, what's your best advice on how you can get the organization to shift to value? I imagine that can be hard to do.
Yeah, I personally believe, and I may not have the best answer here, but I personally believe that the customer voice is always the most important data point, or generally the most important data point. So what I would say is find a way of getting customers to validate what their kind of motivations are, right? And chances are it's not your features and functionality. If you can find a way of quantifying that or showing that the customer cares less about your feature and functionality rather than solving the problem, I would go that route. But it's a very difficult one, so I don't have a very solid answer for you.
That's fair. Are there any other questions that participants had? We'll give you about a minute to type in anything you want. I've also had a couple of people message me, Abdul, just interested in your resume help. So just to reiterate, I think Abdul suggested that you connect with him on LinkedIn for that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Happy to do that.
Great. One more question from Kamal. How do you measure productivity?
So what we did in that particular situation, we went on site with the customers. We watched how they were doing their job on a day-to-day basis. So they were in their systems or their current systems at the time. We were watching them enter data, process data, and send it on to other parts of the organization. We measured what the length of that process was step by step. Then we put together a whole comprehensive picture. So from the time you initiate your process to the time that process concludes, how long does it take? Then we also gave them kind of a, what do you call it, a free license for a trial to do it with our technology. And of course, it takes a little bit of training to get those people to understand how the technology works, right? But once they know it, then you go through the same process again and you measure the difference. And like I said, for us, the productivity difference was tremendous. So in many cases, you have to give it a day or two of being able to train those individuals.
I have a question that I want to ask. Back on one of the slides where you were showing the different value and how you were different from competitors to try to figure out, which are the ones that you want to focus on. In the example of the case that you were showing, there were like some really clear areas where you were stronger than competitors. And I remember you brought up the community one as an additional one.
The matrix, yes.
Yeah, the matrix. What if your competitor A in this scenario, we don't always have the benefit of being able to tick the box or be the best sort of in market on multiple things. If you're competitor A in the scenario, what do you do in this case when you're suggesting to have 3 different value props? Do you look for additional ones like the community value to add in, or what are your thoughts there?
So certainly that's always a possibility, right? You have to make sure that that's something your customers actually care about, right? We had completely missed it until our customers told us that that's important for us. So you have to, just simply, it's not simply a matter of adding a new item in there. It's something that if your customers care about it. It may be that your functionality is not, your product is not capable of doing what it's supposed to do. Maybe it's that your services organization is not able to help out the way other competitors are doing. So some of it may be pretty strategic beyond what marketing can do, right? Maybe it's an organizational issue.
That's fair, which can also be a part, I guess, of the product marketer role to bring those issues and surface them across the organization. Great. I think we're done for questions. Oh, wait, here's one. Any recommendations for how to articulate a value proposition where ROI is hard to quantify? News or business information as an example. That's from Daniel.
Yeah, ROI is often very difficult to quantify. I mean, try quantifying ROI of a product marketer, right? That's a pretty funny one to me because we ourselves can't measure our own ROI in many cases. It really comes back down to what does your customer care about, right? If you can't quantify the specific number, can you show how you have had impact on the customer in other ways? That's what I would say. But no, absolutely, there's times when you simply cannot quantify ROI.
How do you, as a product marketer for yourself, try to actually measure the ROI of your function?
For me, it depends on what my goals are, right? If it may be on annual recurring revenue, that's an important one, right? Now, understanding that you're not the only one that touches ARR, there's 100 other people at the company that do it as well. If it's a matter of if your goal is about leads, to me, it's not just about capturing leads, it's about what do you do with those leads? Do you convert them into SQLs? And does that ultimately, what's the ultimate outcome? Do you get revenue out of it, right? So it really depends on where it is. If your churn might be another important one, right? What impact can product marketing have on reducing churn? Those are the types of kind of high-level strategic ways of quantifying product marketing's value.
Awesome. Okay, well, Abdul, thank you very much for your time today. This was a great webinar. Again, we'll send out the recording of this in the afternoon later today. But again, thank you very much for coming, everyone. And we'll be doing more webinars in the future. You'll hear from us on those. But Abdul, this was a great one. Really appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. And I see a couple of people on here that message from past history. Hi, guys. Nice to see you.
Awesome. Take care, everyone.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.